Hi folks, so we're gonna do something a little bit different for our upcoming class. We're gonna do a concept that we teachers sometimes call a flipped classroom. So I'm going to actually lecture to everyone now as part of a homework assignment, and then in class we're going to work on an assignment together in groups. It's gonna be a little bit more challenging with some pretty long questions. So in order for us to be prepared to do that assignment, listen closely to this brief lecture, and then you will have a chance in class, at the beginning of class, to do some reading that will reinforce what I'm going to discuss today. So we're going to focus on 4 key events that kick off what we call the Cold War. So the Cold War is going to be our next unit. It's going to focus on the tensions between the Soviet Union, and we've already discussed their role in World War II in class, and the United States. So the first key term that we're going to learn for the Cold War is the Yalta Conference. So Yalta is a bit of an unusual word. It's spelled Y-A-L-T-A, Yalta Conference. So the Yalta Conference was a meeting between the world powers at the end of World War II. So let's remember what we learned in the last unit. Nazi Germany, of course, was defeated by an alliance of both what we would call the Western powers, so that would be Britain, as well as the United States, as well as an Eastern power, which would be the Soviet Union. Okay, so the Americans and the British would have been descending onto Germany from the west, so they're moving from the west to the east, whereas the Soviet Union, they turned back the Nazis in Russia, what we would call Russia today, excuse me, and they progressed westward from the east. So both forces ended up in Germany, defeating the Germans to end that theater of World War II. So in the Yalta Conference, this was the agreement that Germany, once it was defeated, was going to be split into different zones. So technically there were 4 zones, but the key fact to remember here is that 3 of the 4 zones are Western, so belonging to the United States, Great Britain, and France. And the other zone, which was a little bit larger proportionally than the other 3, was in the east of Germany, and it belonged to the Soviet Union. So Germany was split up on an east-west basis, and that's going to be very important for the rest of the class this year. The next key term I want to introduce after the Yalta Conference is the Marshall Plan. So after World War II, Europe was devastated, both physically and financially, right? As in the damage from the war damaged many different structures. And then financially, everyone's lives were upended because no one was working their normal jobs during the war. And there's quite a transition to get back to their normal mode of economic behavior after the war. So the United States was the most wealthy country at the end of World War II because, of course, no fighting occurred in the United States. So they felt a responsibility to help Europe get back on its feet, not only for the purposes of sort of humanitarian reasons, which was part of it, but also because they were wary that if Europe was not going to be economically strong, they might fall to the forces of communism. And of course, the key thing to remember in this entire unit is going to be the tensions between capitalists. So in the United States, we have a capitalist democracy versus the communists that we see in Soviet Union. So that would be the twofold reasons for the Marshall Plan. They gave out roughly $13 billion in aid at that time, which today would be over $100 billion. So you can imagine that this was quite an expansive piece of financial aid. The next term we're going to go over is the Truman Doctrine, which is a very important one for this unit as well. So the Truman Doctrine takes its name from President Truman, of course, who was the president at the conclusion of World War II. You may remember that he is the one who gave the order to drop the bombs on Japan, for example. So the Truman Doctrine states that the United States was going to take an official policy, and he announced this doctrine at a speech to Congress in 1947, that the United States was going to act to help liberal democracies and to contain the spread of communism. So this would be the basis of American foreign policy for many, many years during the Cold War. So we need to know the Truman Doctrine. The last key term we're going to talk about today, before your class tomorrow, is going to be NATO, which you may have heard recently in the news due to its role in a recent conflict between Russia and Ukraine. So NATO stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. That would be a group which kind of was created to sign the North Atlantic Treaty, from which it takes its name, which was a treaty saying that if any of these countries were attacked by the Soviet Union, was the implication, that all of these countries would work together. So this treaty was signed in 1949, which is kind of when the tensions of the Cold War really began to kick into a higher gear. Okay, so those are the 4 terms that we focused on in today's kind of mini lecture. Again, we're going to reinforce these ideas in a quick amount of reading tomorrow to start off the class, and that'll prepare you for a short quiz. All right, thanks everyone, and have a great night.